In the earliest months of 1940, long before the Battle of Britain had been decided and while much of Europe was already under Nazi control, a small and almost experimental unit of the Royal Air Force quietly took to the skies. Their work was so secret that even most RAF commanders had only a vague idea of what these pilots were doing, or why they flew unarmed and alone, deep into hostile territory. The men belonged to the RAF Photographic Reconnaissance Unit, the PRU, and their mission was simple in theory: bring back the images that Britain needed to survive the coming storm. In practice, it became one of the deadliest assignments of the war. At a time when intelligence was scarce and Hitler's Luftwaffe seemed unstoppable, the PRU operated out of the shadows. Their aircraft, initially modified Supermarine Spitfire Mk2s and later the sleek PR Mk-IVs, were stripped of guns, radios, and armor plating. Every ounce of weight that could be removed meant more altitude, more speed, and a greater chance of outclimbing German fighters. Yet even at 30,000 feet, these pilots understood an unforgiving truth. If they were intercepted over Germany, they had nothing to defend themselves with except the hope of outrunning their hunters. The struggle facing these young aviators was immense. In early 1940, the Luftwaffe controlled vast stretches of European airspace. Radar networks stretched across the continent, flak batteries guarded industrial centers, and German fighter squadrons patrolled key targets almost continuously. The PRU pilots were asked to penetrate this fortress alone. No escorts, no support, often flying hundreds of miles beyond friendly territory. Their reward was the knowledge that the photographs they brought home might help Britain predict bombing raids, identify new weapons systems, or locate the factories that powered the Nazi war machine. Flight Officer Michael Searles, barely 22 years old, captured the feeling in his diary on March 12, 1940. "It is not fear that troubles me," he wrote, "but the silence. Climbing into Germany feels like drifting into another world, one where no one knows you're there and no one will come for you if things go wrong." Many PRU pilots never wrote of their missions again. They simply did not return. The disappearances began almost immediately. In April 1940, a Spitfire PRU aircraft vanished during a photo run over the Ruhr, an industrial corridor crucial to the German war economy. The pilot had radioed a single routine position update as he crossed the Dutch coastline. After that, nothing. No distress call, no radar trace, no mechanical explanation. The aircraft never made it home. The loss was quietly recorded but not publicized, for the very existence of these missions was still classified. Back at Benson Airfield, the other PRU pilots walked past the empty dispersal bay, each man silently aware that he could be next. Historical context reveals how high the stakes truly were. Britain in 1940 had few sources of high-quality intelligence. Human networks in occupied Europe were still forming. Enigma decryption efforts were in their infancy. American help had not yet arrived. The PRU's long-range reconnaissance flights were one of the only ways the Allies could understand what Germany was building, planning, or concealing. Every photograph was a clue. Every roll of film could shape military decisions. Air Marshal Hugh Dowding once remarked privately that the PRU's work contributed more to the defense of Britain than any other single operational unit, despite their small size and invisibility within the RAF hierarchy. Yet even today, historians note the eerie pattern of early PRU missions that simply vanished. German records from the time list no confirmed shoot-downs matching several of the missing aircraft. Wreckage was rarely found. Some pilots were believed to have been captured, but no definitive documents ever surfaced. Others may have succumbed to oxygen system failures at extreme altitude, drifting helplessly until fuel ran out. The real answers remain scattered, lost to weather, war, and time. Modern intelligence analysts frequently cite the PRU as a blueprint for today's aerial reconnaissance doctrine: stealth, speed, altitude, and operational independence. The difference, of course, is that modern aircraft have escape systems, advanced sensors, and satellite support. In 1940, these young pilots had nothing but their training, the thin aluminum skin of their aircraft, and the hope that they could slip in and out of the Reich unnoticed. As 1940 turned into 1941, British intelligence needed even more from the PRU. Rumors began circulating of strange activity on the Baltic coast, new structures, unusual troop movements, and whispers of experimental weapons. The missions would become longer, higher, and more dangerous. And among them was one sortie in particular, a flight over Piedmont that would go down as one of the most mysterious disappearances of the entire war. The stage was set for the next chapter of the RAF's most classified reconnaissance operations, where mystery, danger, and history would collide in the skies above Nazi Germany. By mid-1941, a phrase had begun circulating quietly among Britain's intelligence community, two words spoken only in guarded tones: the Baltic Project. Something unusual was happening along the northern coast of Germany, and it was happening inside a heavily restricted complex known as Peenemünde. At first, the hints were vague: new construction, unusual fuel shipments, and reports from Swedish observers of smoke trails rising unnaturally into the sky. For the Allied High Command, the implications were alarming. And so, once again, the RAF Photographic Reconnaissance Unit was called to investigate, flying deeper into Nazi territory than any British aircraft had gone before. The pilots chosen for these Baltic missions flew the Spitfire PRMK-4, sleek, fast, and stripped of everything non-essential. These aircraft carried additional fuel tanks and vertical cameras installed behind the cockpit, capable of capturing astonishing detail at high altitude. But even with these modifications, the Peenemünde flights represented a challenge unlike any the PRU had yet faced. The Baltic coastline was remote, heavily defended, and patrolled by the Luftwaffe's most experienced fighter units. The journey alone, more than 600 miles round-trip, required perfect navigation over open sea, where a single mechanical failure meant certain death. One of the pilots tasked with photographing Peenemünde was Flight Lieutenant Alistair "Sandy" Gunn, flying Spitfire PRMK-4 serial AA-810. Only 22 years old, Gunn was nonetheless considered one of the unit's most skilled high-altitude flyers. His calm demeanor and meticulous planning earned him deep respect within the PRU. On the morning of his final mission, he was seen reviewing a map of the Baltic coast, marking potential flak positions and noting the predicted cloud movements. As he climbed into the cockpit, a fellow pilot recalled Gunn saying almost casually, "If the rumors are true, we'll know soon enough." The struggle facing the PRU on these missions was immense. Peenemünde sat at the end of the Usedom Peninsula, surrounded by marshland and protected by multiple layers of anti-aircraft guns. Luftwaffe radar installations nearby could detect incoming aircraft long before they reached the coast. And the Germans, aware of their own strategic importance, monitored the airspace aggressively. Any unidentified aircraft would be intercepted without hesitation. Despite these risks, the PRU succeeded in capturing some of the earliest images of the facility's rocket testing infrastructure. Long concrete pads, strange tower-like structures, and fuel storage sites appeared on film brought back to RAF Benson. British analysts noted that the shapes and layouts were unlike anything seen in German aviation before. A classified intelligence briefing dated July 1941 recorded the observations succinctly: "Enemy appears to be conducting large-scale trials of a weapon not yet identified. Recommend increased photographic coverage." That increased coverage meant more missions, more risk, and more pilots sent into the teeth of Germany's air defenses. On March 5, 1942, Sandy Gunn took off for what would be one of the most consequential reconnaissance flights of the war. His last radio transmission, routine, calm, confirmed his position over the North Sea. After that, the record becomes uncertain. German documents later revealed that a lone Spitfire had been intercepted near Swlt by elements of Jägerschwader 5. But the details remained inconsistent. One report claimed the aircraft was shot down, another that it was forced to land, and yet another suggested it simply vanished into cloud cover. What is known is this: Spitfire AA-810 did not return. The disappearance rattled the PRU. Gunn had been one of their best, and the loss of both pilot and aircraft weighed heavily on the unit. Yet it also sharpened the mystery. If AA-810 had been destroyed, where were the wreckage confirmations? If Gunn had been captured, why was there no record of his imprisonment until much later in the war? Even post-war investigations offered incomplete answers. In the 1970s, a Norwegian fisherman reported seeing an aircraft crash into coastal waters decades earlier, but nothing definitive was ever recovered. The reveal came not in a single moment, but gradually, through intelligence pieced together from multiple sources. The photographs taken before Gunn's disappearance proved invaluable. They showed the early test stands of what would later become the V-2 rocket, the world's first ballistic missile. British analysts finally understood the stakes. Germany was developing a weapon capable of striking London with no warning, no defense, and unprecedented destructive power. Reflecting on this period, modern intelligence experts often note how reconnaissance failures and disappearances served as catalysts for deeper investigation. The loss of Gunn and other PRU pilots forced the Allies to reassess the scale of the Peenemünde threat. Their sacrifices directly contributed to Operation Crossbow, the Allied effort to identify, disrupt, and ultimately destroy Germany's secret weapons program. But in mid-1941, that knowledge still lay in the future. For the men of the PRU, the Baltic coastline remained a place of danger, uncertainty, and unanswered questions. As the Allies demanded more photographs, the missions would expand beyond Piedmont, toward the vast defensive network Germany was building along its northern shores. And soon, the PRU would be asked to map an even more treacherous region, the fortress-like coastline stretching from Norway to northern France, where another aircraft would vanish after sending a final, haunting message. In the early months of 1942, as the tides of war shifted across Europe, British intelligence faced a new and urgent problem. Germany was fortifying its coastlines at a pace that stunned Allied planners. From the frozen cliffs of northern Norway to the beaches of Normandy, concrete bunkers, radar arrays, and artillery batteries began to appear like a vast iron wall. It was the early foundation of what would later be called the Atlantic Wall. But at the time, very little was known about its layout, strength, or true purpose. To answer these questions, the RAF Photographic Reconnaissance Unit, already battered by losses, was ordered to map the entire coastal defense network. It became one of the most ambitious and dangerous assignments in the unit's history. The struggle began with the sheer scope of the task. To assemble a continuous photographic mosaic from Norway to France, the PRU would have to fly more than 1,500 miles of coastline, each segment covered by overlapping vertical and oblique photographs. The aircraft chosen for these missions were high-altitude Spitfires and newly introduced Mosquito PR variants, each modified for maximum endurance. But no amount of fuel or altitude could fully mitigate the dangers waiting along the coast. The Germans had turned the North Sea into an aerial gauntlet, radar outposts, heavy flak concentrations, and fighters from Jägerschwader 5 and Jägerschwader 26 patrolled key sectors. The PRU pilots would fly alone, unarmed, and often untracked, pushing into zones where even a small miscalculation in fuel or navigation could cost them their lives. Among the pilots tasked with these extended missions was Flight Lieutenant Harold Morgan, a quiet, methodical flyer from Yorkshire known for his ability to stay calm under pressure. Morgan had flown reconnaissance over France before, but never this far, never this deep. His assigned sector was the Heligoland Bight, one of the most heavily defended regions of the German North Sea coast. The area housed airfields, naval bases, early warning radar sites, and the strategically vital island fortresses of Helgoland and Dune. It was the beating heart of Germany's northern defense system. In a briefing room at RAF Benson, a senior intelligence officer outlined the priorities. We need photographs of flak positions, shipping lanes, and any new construction. Intelligence believes the Germans are reinforcing the southern approaches to the Bight. Gentlemen, this will not be a simple in-and-out flight. The pilots studied the maps, silently tracing their routes across hostile territory. Morgan reportedly glanced at the projected flak zones and muttered dryly, "Looks like they don't want visitors." Historical insight from this period reveals just how desperate the Allies were for accurate coastal intelligence. Early reports from resistance groups were helpful but incomplete. Radar intercepts suggested the Germans were expanding early warning networks, but details remained unknown. For the planning of future operations, convoy protections, bomber routes, and eventually the invasion of Europe, the Allies needed a clear picture of what awaited them. The PRU's photographs would provide that clarity, but only if the aircraft made it home. On October 12, 1942, Morgan took off in his Spitfire PR Mk-11 under a sky heavy with autumn haze. The flight plan called for him to approach the Bight from the northwest, climb to more than 32,000 feet, and run a series of straight-line passes over the coastal defenses. His last known radio message came just after crossing the North Sea, passing Cloud Bank. Going higher. The transmission was routine, calm, yet those 3 words would become part of the PRU's quiet folklore. What happened next remains one of the most debated puzzles of the unit's operational history. German records offer conflicting accounts. A report from a flak battery at Cuxhaven claimed a British aircraft was spotted but not fired upon. A Luftwaffe interception log from the same afternoon mentioned an unidentified high-altitude contact that climbed beyond pursuit. Another account, written after the war, suggested that Morgan's Spitfire might have suffered an oxygen failure, a dangerous and often fatal event at extreme altitude. Without oxygen, pilots could lose consciousness in seconds, entering an uncontrolled climb or descent. No wreckage was ever found. No body recovered. No confirmed German victory claim matched the time of his disappearance. The North Sea, restless and unforgiving, kept its secrets. The reveal of Morgan's final photographs, or rather their absence, deepened the mystery. His camera bays were never recovered, meaning no images survived to clarify what he observed during his final moments. Yet the missions completed by other pilots in the following weeks revealed the truth that Morgan had set out to confirm. The Heligoland Bight was being transformed into a heavily fortified naval and air fortress. Enormous flak towers, new runways, and radar stations appeared in the images. The Germans were preparing for something big enough to justify turning the Bight into an impenetrable shield. From a modern perspective, Morgan's disappearance symbolizes the brutal cost of intelligence work in an era before drones, satellites, or rescue beacons. These young pilots operated at the very limits of human endurance and mechanical reliability, often vanishing without a trace. Yet their work, dangerous, lonely, and largely unrecognized, shaped Allied understanding of the Atlantic defenses and helped planners prepare for the monumental operations to come. As 1942 closed, the PRU's missions intensified. The targets shifted southward toward France and the Bay of Biscay, where a new threat was emerging: hardened U-boat pens capable of withstanding even the heaviest Allied bombs. And soon, the unit would send its fastest aircraft into the heart of this danger, hoping to capture film that would shape the Battle of the Atlantic, before another aircraft disappeared into the cold, gray sea. By early 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a critical point. German U-boats were inflicting staggering losses on Allied shipping, threatening to sever Britain's supply lifeline. Convoys burned in the night across the North Atlantic, and merchant sailors spoke in hushed tones of wolf packs that seemed to appear from nowhere. What few knew at the time, even within the Allied command, was the scale of Germany's effort to protect and expand its U-boat operations. Along the coast of occupied France, at Brest, Lorient, and Street Nazir, massive concrete fortresses were rising from the rubble. U-boat pens so thick, so reinforced, that no existing bomb in the Allied arsenal could pierce them. The only way to understand their layout, their strength, and their weaknesses was from the air. And that task fell to the RAF Photographic Reconnaissance Unit. The struggle these pilots faced was unlike anything the PRU had encountered before. The Bay of Biscay was among the most heavily defended coastal regions in the Third Reich. German heavy flak batteries, radar stations, and anti-aircraft towers ringed the submarine bases in a protective shell. Luftwaffe fighter groups, including elements of Jagdgeschwader 2 and Jagdgeschwader 26, patrolled constantly, aware that every photograph captured by the Allies brought them closer to targeting these vital facilities. The PRU needed an aircraft fast enough to survive this gauntlet, and the answer came in the form of one of the most remarkable machines of the war, the de Havilland Mosquito. Nicknamed the Wooden Wonder, the Mosquito PR-16 and later PR variants were stripped of guns but equipped with powerful Merlin engines and long-range fuel tanks. They could cruise above 30,000 feet at speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour, fast enough to outrun most German interceptors. Crewed by just two men, the pilot and the navigator-photographer, each sortie demanded absolute coordination, precision, and courage. The engine's droning hum became the heartbeat of these dangerous missions. Among the crews assigned to photograph the French U-boat bases was pilot officer David Howcroft and his navigator, Sergeant Leonard Briggs. They had flown together for months and were known for their professionalism and calm under pressure. Howcroft, a former civilian test pilot, understood the Mosquito's quirks better than most. Its sensitivity to icing, its temperamental fuel systems, and its remarkable ability to slip through German airspace with minimal warning. Briggs, meanwhile, had a reputation for navigating with uncanny accuracy, even when cloud cover or flak bursts obscured ground features. Their mission on March 3, 1943 began like many others: briefing at dawn, a quiet breakfast, and a final review of the target layout. Intelligence officers stressed the importance of this sortie. Recent reports indicated the Germans had reinforced the Lorient pens, adding new protective structures and anti-aircraft positions. The Allies needed updated photographs to plan future bombing raids. Howcroft and Briggs were instructed to fly in from the west at high altitude, make 2 photographic runs, and exit southward toward the open Atlantic before turning home. The Mosquito lifted from RAF Saint-Ival just after sunrise, climbing smoothly above the English Channel toward the coast of Brittany. At 31,000 feet, the aircraft leveled off, engines humming steadily as the French coastline came into view. Below them, the submarine pens at Lorient appeared like a massive concrete scar along the waterfront, an industrial fortress bristling with defenses. As Howcroft began the first photographic pass, the flak opened immediately, black puffs marking their altitude. Briggs, peering into the camera controls, called out altitudes and angles to ensure the frames overlapped precisely. Despite the chaos erupting below, the Mosquito held steady. The first run was successful. The second run was nearing completion when a sudden burst of heavy flak rocked the aircraft. Howcroft fought to keep control as Briggs scrambled to secure the camera system. Yet within seconds the worst appeared to pass. The engine steadied and Howcroft steered south as planned. Their final radio message, calm, routine, reported their exit heading and altitude. After that, silence. They never returned. The reveal came hours later when a French fishing trawler reported debris floating southwest of Lorient, small fragments of aircraft timber consistent with the Mosquito's wooden frame. No bodies were recovered. No German victory claim matched the time of disappearance. One Luftwaffe log mentioned engaging a fast, high aircraft near the coast, but the entry ended without confirmation. To this day, historians debate whether Howcroft's Mosquito was struck by a delayed structural failure caused by earlier flak hits, intercepted by a German fighter, or forced into the sea by engine trouble far from land. The photographs recovered from the floating debris, only a partial reel, were quickly developed. Though incomplete, they revealed new construction on the Lorient pens, confirming intelligence estimates of increased fortification. The images were soon used in planning updated bombing strategies, yet the missing frames left analysts wondering what details the crew had captured in their final moments. Modern scholars often reflect on these missions as stark examples of the razor-thin margin between success and disaster in World War II reconnaissance. The Atlantic War hinged not only on convoys and escort ships but on the intelligence gathered by these unarmed aircraft darting into the heart of enemy territory. As 1943 progressed, the Allies pressed deeper into Europe's industrial heartlands. And soon, the PRU would be assigned a new and even more dangerous target: rumored weapons factories hidden in the mountains of southern Germany, facilities so isolated and well protected that even reaching them would demand a level of precision few aircraft had ever achieved. By late 1944, as the Allies advanced across France and the shattered remnants of the German army retreated toward the Reich's interior, a new intelligence concern emerged, one veiled in secrecy and uncertainty. Reports began filtering in from underground resistance networks, intercepted signals, and scattered POW interrogations. They all hinted at the same troubling idea. Deep in the mountainous regions of southern Germany and Austria, hidden within networks of tunnels, caverns, and reinforced underground halls, the Nazis were relocating critical weapons production. These facilities were rumored to be vast, hardened, and positioned far beyond the reach of conventional bombers. Their existence, if true, posed an enormous threat to the Allied cause. And once again, it fell to the RAF Photographic Reconnaissance Unit to confirm what others could only speculate. The struggle began with geography itself. Unlike the coastal targets of France or the Baltic plains of northern Germany, the Alps presented natural obstacles that challenged even the most advanced reconnaissance aircraft. Jagged peaks, unpredictable wind currents, and sudden weather shifts made high-altitude flight perilous. Many valleys were so narrow that photo runs required precise navigation and timing. Yet intelligence demanded clarity, and clarity required photographs. For these long-range high-altitude missions, the PRU turned to the Mosquito PR-34, the most advanced reconnaissance variant of the war. The PR-34 carried enlarged fuel tanks and uprated Merlin engines, enabling flights exceeding 2,000 miles. Its crew of 2 relied on oxygen systems that had to function perfectly for missions lasting more than 7 hours. The aircraft lacked armament, but its speed, approaching 430 miles per hour at altitude, gave it a fighting chance to outrun German interceptors. Still, Germany's rapidly evolving air defense network included a new threat: the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter. Faster than any Allied aircraft, it represented a leap in aerial warfare. The PRU would face an enemy unlike anything encountered before. Among the crews assigned to probe the Bavarian and Austrian Alps was squadron leader Arthur "Mac" McLaughlin and his navigator, Warrant Officer Peter Howell. McLaughlin, a seasoned reconnaissance pilot, had flown missions over Italy and the Balkans. Howell, meticulous and quiet, was known for maintaining calm even during high-altitude emergencies. Their objective was a rumored industrial complex near the town of Ebensee, believed to be part of the sprawling Project Zayment, an underground network linked to weapons manufacturing and rocket research. The briefing on November 19, 1944 was direct and sobering. Intelligence officers displayed aerial charts marked with question marks rather than confirmed structures. "We believe they are relocating production underground," one officer said. "We need proof: tunnels, ventilation shafts, rail spurs, anything. This is the deepest point we've asked anyone to reach." McLaughlin simply nodded, eyeing the narrow valleys they would have to cross. Taking off from RAF Mount Farm under a crisp morning sky, the Mosquito climbed steadily toward cruising altitude. At 32,000 feet, The world below seemed silent and distant. Howell monitored the camera bay as the Alps rose ahead like a jagged wall. For nearly 2 hours, the aircraft navigated a route designed to bypass known flak concentrations along the Danube. But once over southern Germany, they would be flying into a dense web of radar coverage and fighter patrol zones. As they approached the Salzkammergut region, McLaughlin executed the first photo run, banking into a long, precise arc over Ebben Sea. Below them, nestled among forests and lakes, were structures that did not match civilian layouts, rail lines terminating at cliff faces, construction scars near mountainsides, and suspiciously straight ventilation shafts. Howell's voice crackled through the intercom. "Cameras running. This is definitely something." Then the unexpected happened. Luftwaffe ground observers recorded a fast twin-engined aircraft over the region shortly before noon. Moments later, radar picked up signatures of two Mi-262s scrambling from a nearby airfield, likely Horshing or Munich Riem. Allied intelligence had warned of these jets, but this was one of the first times a PRU crew encountered them directly. Fast, silent, and deadly, the Mi-262s could close distance in seconds. McLaughlin pushed the Mosquito into a shallow dive to increase speed while maintaining camera stability. Howell braced against the turbulence. A German post-war account from a jet pilot describes seeing a silver aircraft at high altitude, but being unable to close before it turned into cloud cover. Whether this was McLaughlin's Mosquito or another Allied aircraft remains uncertain. But one thing is clear, the PR-34 never returned home. Hours passed with no word. Fuel projections ran out. Radio calls went unanswered. Search efforts traced the route over the Alps, but winter storms had already swept the region. No crash site was found. No wreckage. Just silence. The reveal came days later when the developed film, captured during an earlier reconnaissance pass by another crew, showed unmistakable evidence of underground construction at Ebben Sea. Rail lines disappeared into mountains. Enormous ventilation outlets marred the cliffs. The Nazis were indeed shifting production underground. The missing Mosquito's final images, however, were lost forever. Modern analysts still debate the aircraft's fate. Some argue it fell victim to the Mi-262s. Others believe icing or oxygen failure struck during its evasive maneuvers. A few suggest the aircraft may have clipped a ridge while flying blind in cloud cover. Whatever the cause, the truth remains hidden in the Alps. As winter closed in on 1944, the PRU prepared for its final and most sensitive assignment, a mission centered not on factories or defenses, but on escape routes. The war was ending, but the movement of Germany's leadership was shrouded in secrecy. And soon, one last flight would capture images that would spark more questions than answers. By the opening months of 1945, the war in Europe was unmistakably nearing its end. Allied forces were advancing from east and west, cities lay in ruins, and the German military structure was collapsing under the weight of constant retreat. Yet behind the chaos, intelligence analysts noticed something unsettling. Convoys of staff cars, unmarked trains, and scattered Luftwaffe transport flights were reportedly moving through southern Germany and Austria, often at night, often without documentation. Rumors circulated of evacuation routes being prepared for high-ranking officials, Nazi party elites, and key scientific personnel. Some claimed these paths led toward Alpine strongholds. Others suggested escape corridors into neutral territory. None of it could be verified. And so, in the war's final stretch, the RAF Photographic Reconnaissance Unit faced its last and most sensitive mission, documenting the movements of a regime on the verge of disappearance. This struggle was unique in its uncertainty. Unlike photographing U-boat pens or weapons facilities, these missions targeted roads, valleys, and mountain passes, places where anything from a military convoy to a civilian refugee column might appear. Sorting truth from rumor became its own challenge. The Allies had intercepted fragments of encrypted communications hinting at priority transports, leaving Berlin and Munich. Swiss border stations reported increased activity on the German side. The U.S. Office of Strategic Services, OSS, passed along accounts from informants describing secret routes across the Alps. But intelligence remained fragmented, contradictory, and incomplete. The responsibility to clarify it fell to the PRU. For these long-range flights, the RAF relied heavily on the Mosquito PR-34 and the later PR-32 variants, fast, high-flying aircraft capable of photographing entire mountain corridors in a single sortie. One of the crews tasked with this delicate operation was Flight Lieutenant James Whitlow and his navigator, Flying Officer Charles Reed. Both were experienced, steady-handed, and accustomed to flying at the edges of the Reich's collapsing defenses. Their mission profile differed from earlier reconnaissance flights. Instead of targeting hardened structures, they were to track movement, vehicles, trains, aircraft, through the passes of the Bavarian Alps and into the region near Berchtesgaden. The briefing on March 11, 1945 was conducted in unusual silence. Maps showed red-marked escape routes, the Autobahn corridors near Salzburg, rail junctions feeding into Austria, and the heavily forested passes threading through the Berchtesgaden valleys. Intelligence officers stressed that this mission was not about preparing bombing strikes but about documenting patterns. "It's about understanding where they're going," the lead officer said, "and perhaps, who they're trying to save." Whitlow and Reed took off at dawn under a sky stained red by the rising sun, an omen noted by ground crew with uneasy glances. The Mosquito climbed quickly, racing above patchy clouds that covered much of southern Germany. At 30,000 feet, the Alps stretched beneath them like a white, serrated crown. The world below was quiet, yet the tension inside the aircraft was palpable. Their first photo run covered the Berchtesgaden approach roads, where scattered convoys, some military, some civilian, could be seen threading through the valleys. Reed noted unusual activity around several smaller airfields near the Austrian border, including temporary structures that intelligence had not previously documented. The cameras captured rail spurs leading into forested areas, isolated clusters of vehicles parked without obvious military purpose, and in one case, a long column of trucks concealed beneath camouflage netting. "This is more than a retreat," Reed remarked over the intercom. "Someone's trying to vanish." As the Mosquito continued its circuit, Whitlow picked up unusual aircraft movements below, 3 twin-engine transports taking off from what appeared to be an auxiliary field south of Salzburg. Their destination was unclear. Reed adjusted the cameras to widen the capture angle, ensuring no detail was missed. Then came the moment that still puzzles historians. Upon returning to base, the darkroom technicians began developing the film as they always did. But before the full reel emerged, several frames were already missing, cleanly cut, according to some accounts, simply blank, according to others. Official reports written in the days that followed offer inconsistent explanations. One document claimed the film had been damaged during landing. Another stated the camera malfunctioned mid-flight. A third, marked restricted, suggested the missing frames had been removed for separate analysis. The reveal never arrived. No official record indicates what those lost frames showed. What remains are the surrounding images, clear photographs of evacuation routes, growing clusters of staff cars near Alpine estates, and railway lines moving unusually high volumes of cargo toward Austria. The pictures raised more questions than answers. Why were certain convoys heavily guarded while others were not? Why were airfields with no strategic value suddenly hosting transport aircraft? And why, in the war's final weeks, did the Reich appear to be shifting personnel into terrain known for its isolation and difficulty of access? From a modern perspective, this final PRU mission symbolizes the opacity of the war's closing days, a time when fact and rumor blurred under the pressures of collapse. Intelligence analysts still debate what vanished from Whitlow and Reed's reel. Was it evidence of high-level evacuation? Movement of classified documents? Relocation of scientists? Or simply film damaged in flight? The answers remain elusive. As the Allies closed in and Germany finally fell in May 1945, many of the people and vehicles photographed in those final Alpine corridors simply disappeared into history. And with them went the last untold chapter of the PRU's most classified operations, missions flown by unarmed aircraft over a dying regime, capturing images that would remain shrouded in mystery long after the war's end.